So, again, thanks to all the folks that were able to hop in and join our session here today. I think we'll likely try and keep this a little bit more interactive since we do have a smaller group. And we can really focus on getting into the meat of some of the content here. The session that we're going to cover today is called Workforce of the Future and Data Storytelling. And so really what we're going to be focused on is just some of the trends that we've been seeing out in the business marketplace in terms of different skill sets, different needs, how technology is transforming just day-to-day business operations, and how teachers specifically and education plays a pivotal role in that. And then the back half of the presentation will be focused on data storytelling, which we've got kind of a real life example that we plan to go through just to make sure that everyone is kind of comfortable performing their own sets of data analysis and storytelling, so that hopefully you're able to go away from this session at least feeling that you have a pretty good understanding of how some of these technologies work and where they could be applied in some of your day-to-day. And so, like I said, since we do have a smaller group, please feel free to stop me or Kayla throughout the presentation if you have any questions or if something isn't clear. Really just want to make sure that the session is best utilized for what everybody wants to get out of it.
Yeah, and Josh, I think there's a chat function as well. If you guys want to ask questions there instead of out loud or anything, feel free, and we can get to those too.
Yep. Yeah, thanks for that, Kayla. All right, so we'll start off with introduction. So I'm Josh here, coming to you from New York. I currently work with PwC's Responsible Business Leadership team, leading all of our efforts on impact measurement and ESG reporting. Prior to my current role, I spent about 7 years focused on sales and finance operations in the software industry. And I am born and raised in the Midwest, grew up in Indiana, and a huge Indiana basketball fan. So glad to be connecting with folks also from the Midwest here.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kayla. I am coming to you live from Boston, Massachusetts. Was born and raised here, did a 4-year stint for college in North Carolina in a small town called High Point, and came right back home. Who knows if I'll ever leave. So I work with Josh on the Responsible Business Leadership team at PwC. And I truly focus on employee and firm giving, my bigger programs, as well as special projects and data alongside Josh. So previously, my role at PwC was actually an auditor in the healthcare and pharmaceutical industries, just going in, making sure all their ducks are in a row, making sure the numbers they're reporting for their financials are all right and look good. So that was a fun previous role for me, but let me tell you, this new one is pretty cool. And so, yeah, fun fact about me, I am an older sister, and I will brag on my sister as much as I can. An older sister to a bilingual occupational therapist. She's 25, so she's a little bit younger than me, and she just recently moved home. So I get to see her in Boston quite a bit. All right, and with that, I am going to kick it off with a little video. But before I do that, and like Josh said, we're here to really talk about what the future could look like for yourselves and for your students. And so this video will highlight Janine Letford is an educator on the West Coast. We work quite a bit with her. But she's going to talk about the digital fitness app, which is something PwC has recently rolled out to bring some digital education, technology education to teachers like yourselves and educators like yourselves in a really easy way, just like literally on your phone. And so you'll hear her talk about that and why she believes it's important. So
could I ask a question?
Absolutely.
Sorry to interrupt. I'm Molly.
Hi, Molly.
I was just wondering, will this recording and will this video be available for us?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yep.
On the resources page or something?
Yep, absolutely. We'll be sending the slides, and there's a bunch of links at the bottom. So we'll make sure that you guys have access to all this once we're done. I think the wrap up, yeah, they'll send that out to you guys. But
thank you.
yeah, of course. Cool. So yeah. So as I was saying, the video will kind of go into the app, and Janine will explain why she thinks it's important. Janine's been part of our youth education initiative here at PwC. And it's been a $320 million commitment for 5 years. And it truly is focused on upskilling our youth, our educators, and also mentoring both of those demographics of people. And so the Access Your Potential program really was built on financial literacy, and now it's really moved into, like, the world is changing, so is our program, into teaching tech and digital skills. And so it's just been an incredible program. You'll hear her talk a little bit about it. So with that, Josh, I will stop talking and bragging on AYP and all the good stuff that program does. And I believe you're gonna play the video.
Yep. Let me share my screen over here.
And Janine's a really cool woman. If you guys have never heard of her, she's a TEDx speaker. She's award-winning teacher. She's really interesting. So she's got a bunch of resources out there. Feel free to take a look at her stuff.
Perfect. All right, Kayla, can you see my screen?
Yeah.
Let me hit play then.
I wish I could slow the pace of the world, but we can't. What we can do is make sure that our employees are given the right skills so they can thrive. Digital fitness is more important than ever because customers and employees demand it. You're likely, as a CEO or board, feeling it now, but if you're not, you're going to be feeling it in the next 1 or 2 years. And so for us, the digital fitness app is a way for a company to harness the innovation capabilities of thousands of people across this organization, and our clients as well. You're seeing immediate productivity. It makes them better professionals today. As leaders of the business community, we have a responsibility to our existing workforce, but also the future workforce. We've always been involved in the community, particularly at K through 12 elementary school, to invest in education. The digital fitness app was a way for us to take it to the next level.
If I'm not doing my job in upskilling and exposing myself to the new technologies that are coming on the landscape, I'm almost, just impeding them without even realizing it. Virtual reality. When students are exposed to this type of thinking, they see themselves as problem solvers, and they have the courage to dream up the ideas that can actually fix the problems that we see today.
We have a big responsibility to groom the next workforce of the future, to make sure when they come into the workplace, they hit the ground running.
Hi, I'm Effort, and I'm an educator.
All right. Awesome. So that I'll reshare my screen, Josh, and I think it's on to you.
Yep. Yeah, so I think what that video showed, and the reason we kind of chose to lead with that, is really, one, to talk through the commitments that our firm has made to education and why both Kayla and I are so excited to be here today, but also to really talk through why we see education as important, in upskilling the future workforce.
Sorry, give me a second. Here we go.
Kayla,
Sorry about that.
Yeah, you're good. You're good. Yeah, so I think, leading off with that, I've got a couple of stats here on the slide, just from a couple of surveys that PwC does on an annual basis. But, the key highlights or takeaways is that I think everyone here is well aware that technology is radically transforming companies and really changing the way that individuals work across every single business unit out there. And so, while someone like myself coming out of school was, trained in understanding finance and economics, and when I came into the workforce, while that was good knowledge to have, I quickly found myself working with different types of technology, needing to understand what cloud was versus on-premise when we were talking about, different reporting systems, needing to understand how to work with different types of reporting tools or different types of data analytics out there. And so what we've got here, with some of those quotes is really just driving home the point that this is happening holistically, across the entire marketplace. And you'll see that CEOs do feel there is a pretty big responsibility for their employees to get some of this digital training. And even the youth that are coming out of schools do really find it important that they learn some of these ideas and skills. And so what we want to focus on here today is not necessarily expecting anyone to leave this session and being able to code. If we're being completely honest, both Kayla and myself cannot code up anything of true excellence that you'll see in some of the leading companies. But what we do want everyone to walk away with is actually a good understanding of what these different types of technologies are and some of the techniques involved with them, so that, you can bring that back to the classroom and make sure that you're giving the students a mindset of problem solving and a mindset of being able to understand where and how to plug in some of these pieces of technology.
Awesome. And then building off of kind of what Josh said here, we totally understand this is not going to be, we're not going to teach you how to code right now, but we do understand that this topic itself can be really overwhelming. Even if we're not teaching you to code, even if we're teaching it as a subject at a high level, it can be really overwhelming and a little bit scary. And so we just put these stats, and like Josh said, I'm not going to read through these, but it's to kind of put y'all at ease and just remind you aren't alone. And this is something that is really scary. And you can see there 30% of people are worried about getting their jobs taken away from some sort of automation or robotics. And that can be really scary. And I feel that way. And so we want you to know, we want to level set. This is really scary, but that the opportunities, if you really dive in and learn these subjects, are endless. And that what we're seeing is that the trend is that people want to learn these skills. Although it's really scary and can be overwhelming, people are ready to, you can see there's 77% of people surveyed want to learn. It's a huge majority. So although it can be scary, people are ready to learn. And I think that that's the most inspiring thing about this subject, is that it's so complex, but everyone's ready to jump in. And Josh will, I think get into this, but we just want to remind you all, this is a journey. This is a complete journey. Like, this is starting from the bottom, moving your way into a million zigzags, learning different things. And me and Josh are still on this journey, and I don't think that'll ever end. So wherever you guys are in your skill set, it doesn't matter. Just definitely, we just encourage you to jump in, and you're taking the first step by being here. So with that, Josh, I will hand it to you for a few slides.
Yeah. So, we had already spoken to this point. No need to focus on this, but as we said, the reason we chose to have this presentation with a bunch of teachers and educators like yourselves is we do truly believe that bringing a knowledge of these types of technology to the classroom is really important. And so the slide that Kayla's got up here speaks to just 4 of the major pieces of technology that we've seen in the marketplace. This is by no means fully exhaustive, and if we're being completely honest with ourselves, in a couple of years, this top 4 list will likely change. And that's the whole point, right? So the first piece is going to be heavily focused on data and analytics, which I'm not going to spend too much time on now because we'll go through it on the next slide. But that is really the focus of our presentation today. And this is going to be kind of the most widespread piece of technology that is, like I mentioned, really happening across the entire business spectrum, no matter what function you're actually coming in from. The next piece is really robotics. And when I say robotics, I don't necessarily mean, machines in an automotive factory building a car or something to that effect, though that does fit into this robotics category. what I'm really speaking to from a business standpoint is more so software, or think about macros that can run business processes across a different set of applications out there, right? And so what we're actually seeing is where you would typically have had a person, let's just take a standard reporting function in a finance team, where you would have typically had a person run a report, format that report, do a bunch of calculations, then take that information and put it into a deck with a couple of visuals. There are softwares out there that are now actually performing all of that end to end, almost in the snap of a finger. If you click a button, you can actually just see it happen live on your computer screen. And so I always relate that back to an Excel macro, where you see the process happen kind of quickly, and it's almost like the computer has a mind of its own. But this is truly revolutionary because it's taking everyone's time away from doing some of those repetitive tasks into, folks in finance specifically are able to then spend their time mostly on analysis and driving insights that they can then communicate back to their boss, their superior, or whoever they're actually making that presentation to. The third one here on the screen is the cloud, and I think this is one that everyone is using, regularly. If you have an iPhone or if you use, Google Docs or anything to that effect, we're using the cloud right now. But this is mostly just where that information is actually being stored or housed. And the benefit of this, as we're seeing today, is the days of the past where, just building a PowerPoint deck, where it was typically I would build a couple of slides, send that deck over to Kayla, she'll build a couple of slides and send it back. Having everything housed in one central location just allows for a lot more collaboration, across a variety of different stakeholders.
And less user error too, kind of, right? Change, change control was crazy then. So yeah, even that small thing's made my life 10 times easier.
Oh my gosh, yeah. And then the last one here on the screen is really just artificial intelligence, which is, what I would call as a subset or an evolution of data and analytics. And so this gets into how do we use some of these technologies and what we would call intelligent robots to be able to learn and do what's really more like statistical forecasting, to say what is the proposed outcome or what could actually be happening based upon the pieces of information that we've actually seen today. And Miriam, I saw you had a question, so feel free to hop in.
Yeah, I was just wondering when you were talking about the Google Docs, so yeah, I've really seen and used the value a lot with students, and then also with leadership. I work for St. Paul Public Schools. We do see problems as well. So I was kind of wondering, documents not that they randomly change. I mean, you can trace back to who changed those. But we definitely, it is hard to keep a document where you want it to be. And so that has caused some confusion, even with, requesting different signatures, and one person signed it at a certain point when they saw certain pieces of information, and then someone changed those pieces of information, and then someone who previously signed it felt like, they didn't agree to what was the final document. And with students, it's a similar situation where an assignment or response has gone out, and then it changed, and then they saw previous information. So I was just wondering if you had feedback on that or ways to deal with that.
Oh yeah, I will say I have been dealing with this right now while we're working with our lawyers. So anytime we get different documents or contracts that we have to work with any of our clients or vendors on, we do have very similar issues in terms of version control, I think is what you were referring to there, Miriam, and how can you make sure that a document is quote unquote final before everyone is able to run through it and sign on, if it was a contract, back to our earlier example. I will say there is going to have to be a little bit of communication and training that you'll have to push out to individuals, just to make sure that, once everyone has gone through and finished a document, they then either send a note out to the rest of the team and say this document is finalized, so that everyone can go through and start signing it. The alternative that we've actually started doing is typically when we share documents with folks we are collaborating with. So in this example, if Kayla and I were working on the deck, we would give each other edit access so that we're going in and changing the materials in real time. What we then do to some of our bosses when they're going through and reviewing is we don't necessarily give them edit access. We give them either comments or just viewer access, which allows them to go in and, if they don't agree with a certain set of language or verbiage, then they would just drop a comment in so everyone can see that, and then any of the, conversations that's happened since then. But I will say it can be challenging at times because, at least for us, we're almost telling our boss, hey, don't mess with anything. Just give us your thoughts and let us edit it. But that's at least the way that, within our team itself, we've just tried to combat some of that. Does that answer the question, Miriam?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. And yeah, I guess that has probably been the largest problem is, if I'm sending something out, then, someone over me will send it to other people and give them edit access. So even though so, okay. Yeah, it's happening, not just with me then.
No, this is everywhere. And I will say, even in client services, when we were working on different engagements, typically, we're operated as a partnership. And so the partners are the ones who are the last to review the deck before it can go over to some of our client stakeholders. Typically, what we'll do is we'll almost make a copy of the deck itself. And so that way, if we need to revert back to an older version, we can just refer to that document in case, the partners don't necessarily tell us what they had changed. Or something like that. So there's always going to be different learnings and tips and tricks. And to be honest, I am not a Google guru by any means, but that's just some of the items that we've put in place. And I'm sure, as you go through it, you can find some other solutions as well.
Yeah, let us know if you do. We could use them.
Awesome. Well, with that, Kayla, can we go to the next slide, actually? Yeah. Perfect. Okay, so this slide is really going to go deep on data and analytics. And so we've kind of got this maturity curve there on the screen, which is talking to kind of the continued growth in analytics and how this is actually transforming what's happening within companies, right? And so the first item that we've got there, which is more what we're just going to call descriptive analytics, this is where you would go through your set of information and be able to understand truly just what happened. So you're looking at anything historical. What are the trends you're seeing? What is that in a summary type of view, so that you can actually describe, I think the example we're talking about is test scores. Within this semester, all of my students scored on average X percent, like 50% or probably 80%. Something to that effect. If you take that then one step forward, this is where some of the human interaction and analysis comes into play. And so we'd call this, diagnostic analytics. Think in terms of a doctor going through and understanding your symptoms. Why is this actually happening? And so this is going to be looking at different causes, different sorts of items that could be leading to those trends and outcomes that you're actually seeing in your data. Some of this might not actually be within the information that you're analyzing itself. This is truly going to take a human hat to put onto place to be able to say, why is this happening, in order just to better understand what really has been going on there. And then when you take that one step forward, this is getting into the predictive analytics type of space, which, if we're being completely honest, this is happening all the time that some of us might not even be aware of. So this is getting into answering the question of, well, what could happen based upon everything that we've seen historically about you. And so if you think about any sort of video streaming services or online shopping services, all of those larger companies and organizations are tracking your purchasing history. They're tracking all the videos that you're watching, and they're doing some analysis on the back end to say, in this example, Josh tends to like, movies or videos, for me, just true crime or mafia gang-related types of atmospheres. And so they might suggest, based upon that past history, hey, you might like watching Ozarks, or you might like watching The Godfather, or something to that effect, based upon what has really been happening, previously and historically. And so those first three items together is what we would just call data storytelling, and that'll be the focus of the back half of the presentation. But this is happening pretty openly and widespread across the business community, always in different flavors, just based upon where that company is on their journey of data and analytics. The next item is really where a lot of what I would just call leading software and technology companies are actually looking to get to. And this is what we're calling as prescriptive analytics. So back to that doctor example where you've looked at all the symptoms, you've identified what they might be sick with. This is then saying, well, how do you go and remedy that, or what should you do based upon that action? And so the example that I always refer to is like a GPS navigation application. If you are navigating to a certain destination and you're supposed to turn right, but instead you accidentally turn left, on the back end, that application is updating to say, well, now that you've turned left, here's the new path that you need to take to get to your end destination. That's where prescriptive analytics comes in, and it's just making recommended decisions to get to that, right answer, quote unquote. And then the last piece is truly, there's only a few companies out there that are really doing this well. And a lot of companies are starting to experiment in this realm, but this is what we're calling, cognitive analytics. This is where artificial intelligence and machine learning all come into play. But this is saying, based upon all the sets of historical information that we have and the predicted outcomes that we have based upon that, how does this continuous sort of monitoring and learning happen so that we can change on the fly and get better at ourselves? And so, the classic machine learning example that I always give is a lot of companies have set up, collection centers, so to speak. So they're working with other businesses, or they're working directly with consumers, and they need to go out and contact that customer to make a collections call for some outstanding bill or invoice. What I've seen is companies actually taking that payment history and purchasing history of those customers to actually not only say, these are the few customers that are actually at risk that we should contact and work with, but it's even actually suggesting different types of payment plans based upon that customer's purchase history, based upon that customer's creditworthiness. If it is a larger business, they're incorporating some of that data, and that will truly update in real time as it gets additional reporting back to that organization based on quarterly filings or something to that effect that companies are actually reporting out there. And so with that, I'll kind of pause, because I know I just threw a lot out in terms of analytics, but any questions in terms of the spectrum or different types of applications of what these different pieces of technology are?
Hi, this is Molly. I don't necessarily have any questions, but this here, just this slide alone, so helpful, because I have started to teach the last couple of years entrepreneurship and design thinking.
Cool.
To get kids or students to, go out and collect data and observe their potential customers, to make changes to their product or pricing, or just really to develop empathy for their customer, to understand their customer. Like this is so helpful. I really need to slow down. What I find as a teacher, I just so briefly, okay, well, here's how you conduct an interview. I mean, there's such limited tools out there for us, but I really need to slow down and really teach students really this process that, okay, first of all, you just got to talk to your customer, and you just have to describe what's the problem, and then talk to that person, what could be a potential solution. So this is really helpful for me as an entrepreneurship teacher and as that design thinker, where we're trying to solve problems. I see it like I can really apply it to that. So I appreciate
yeah.
that.
Yeah, thank you for that, Molly. And what I would say is, even when I started several years ago learning about these different types of technologies, to your point, it was a lot, and I almost was like oh crap, now I'm really starting to need to get into the meat of this and slow down my own process of learning. And so, completely agreed. And we've got a couple of links in the back of the deck, but we can share some additional slides if that would be helpful to just talk through kind of the growth of what that actually is, so that, at least when I was thinking about it, this was really helpful to say, okay, what happens as a step one, what happens as a step two, and how does that continue to grow? And the real life examples, that's what really helped it click with me. Thinking about what Netflix or an Amazon is actually doing on the back end that I might not be aware of, but that's truly like revolutionary sets of analytics that they're performing. That for the most time, even now, is not even being done by a person. It's being done by a computer.
Right. Yep. Very interesting. I would love those links and things like that you mentioned. So thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Josh, I was wondering, for students who might be interested in these sort of questions and this sort of work, what would their typical role be within a company? Like, would it be in IT?
Yeah.
Would it be in marketing? Who would really be involved in either gathering or using this information?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm gonna unfortunately give you a classic consultant answer and say it depends, because truly what I've been seeing, I've worked in finance, I've worked in supply chain, I've worked in an HR and operations type of setting. This is happening across almost every single business unit out there. And so, what we're saying is, while it's good to have the classic, I came out with a finance and economics focus from my undergrad. I did not know anything about data, and I had to learn all of it on the job because that's what was just required of me. I mean, you're seeing, let's take a finance example, right, where they are analyzing their customer base. They need to be able to say what products are selling well, what products aren't selling well. Why might that product not be selling properly? Is it a lack of spend that we're putting in marketing? Is it a lack of customer demand? Are there only a few sets of customers that actually like this product in a certain age range? Or is it a pretty broad base? And so typically what that used to be done, maybe 7-8 years ago, is that was mostly done by an IT department, to your earlier question, right? Is you would have folks from the business have a question, they would pose that to IT, IT would go in and take a look at all the underlying data and information and give back an answer a week or two, later, depending on where they were at. But what's happening is, just given how fast and everything is moving now and the pace of that, a lot of companies are actually hiring, what we're just calling as business analysts or data analysts for a lot of their functions, where individuals are not only expected to understand their competency area, which would be finance, HR, marketing to that effect, but also have a baseline understanding of data analytics and data storytelling, so that they can bring that into their specific function. And even now, working in a CSR, a corporate responsibility function for PwC, we're using this heavily, not only to understand what's the impact to our own employees, are we retaining those employees longer, are they happier at work, some of the what I call like HR type of analytics, or we're even using this to measure some of the societal impact of our work, right? Which is through completely different spectrums, if you think about it, right? In terms of, one is what I would call a lot easier, of being able to understand if our companies or our employees are enjoying what we're giving them, because you can just see it if they're staying or not. But even when we get into the societal impact, it's then getting into the question of, well, how do I measure this? What would I use to collect that data, which is not necessarily straightforward all the time. And that'll actually get us into the second part of the presentation that Kayla's going to focus on, about like how we go through a process like this, which, we didn't put too much content on the slides, but hopefully that can also be a good resource to share with students as they begin some of their, data storytelling, data analytics, in design thinking type of session. So with that, Kayla, I'll punt it back over to you.
Awesome. Yeah, those are awesome questions. And Miriam, when you asked that, I was like, I think about that all the time of how crazy different the space is. Like, I would never have guessed the stuff I'm doing now. I would never have guessed in a CSR role that you would even touch half the data I do. And now it's just, I mean, every single business unit, if we had enough people to do it, every single team should have someone like Josh and myself, like, because that's how you produce good programs. That's how you have like good results. That's how even from a business perspective, that's how you make more money. Like, it's not just the people in the back room pounding away on the computer anymore. It's people that are taking those skills and making stories about it. And this is what we'll go through today, which is I'm so happy you asked that question, but, and taking those stories and putting them into the universe to make real change. So I'm so happy you asked that question. Okay, cool. So I will jump into really the meat of the presentation, although that's not to take away from everything Josh just did. But so we are, yeah, question?
Can I add something?
Yeah.
I just want to commend you guys for the diagram that you just took off a few minutes ago.
Yeah.
Very helpful to individuals like me that is not that super tech like you guys, and I am learning. And most of these things that you have been saying, I was listening to them, but this diagram, at least taxing an ordinary layman, we know the meaning of descriptive analysis, diagnosis, and all these stuff things. And I love the way you bring everything together with the examples of the doctor and all this stuff. It makes it more understandable for individuals like me, and I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Oh, good. Good. I know Josh kind of put this together and I learned from it. When he put it on the slide, I was like, Josh, I didn't know that. He's like, yes, it's so helpful.
Yeah, I mean, if you'll notice, actually, what we did in the first half of the presentation was a data-driven storytelling type of approach, right? So we had presented some statistics and facts behind it in order to tell our story and narrative of continuous learning. And so that's, I'm really glad it resonated with everyone, because that's absolutely the point that we want to make sure that everyone walks away with.
Cool. Awesome. All right. So we're going to focus on this, bottom left rectangle here for the next part of really data storytelling. And so I'll pull you through a real life example that we kind of just made up, but I hope will resonate the same that the examples Josh has given you. And it's really a step-by-step process. It's do one, do the next. And so the first is to form a hypothesis. And for me, when I was making this slide, I was like, God, I feel like I'm back in biology class writing those like science reports. And it's been a long time since I've been there, maybe not so far away for some of you, but, and so we know what that is. It's coming up with a problem statement and figuring out what exactly you're looking for as far as data goes. And I'll go through each of these in more detail, but I just want to kind of lay a groundwork so you kind of know what's coming. But the next step is really going to be collecting data. So you have this problem statement now. What data do you need to look at to solve that problem? Is it one set of data? Where does that data live? Is it clean? Is it messy? And just pulling that all together. The next step is data wrangling. And again, we'll go through this example, but this is really making the data look good, making it structured. Because we know, and Josh and I pulled data from like 10 different systems sometimes, and the data will look completely different. And some of it's messy, and some have empty columns, and some have empty cells. And it's like, the data wrangling really pulls that all together into a uniform piece that you can easily read and digest and make sure you're understanding, the data in there. So the next is going to be the analysis. So that's really the meat of this process, is reading all the data you just collected and figuring out what happened. and why it happened. And really digging deep, because obviously there could be 10 answers for that. And then the last one here is going to be harness insight. So what are you taking away from that data? How are you going to present it? And what type of visuals and things like that will you use to kind of get your point across? So with that, I will jump into the first step here. And obviously, jump in, ask questions, whatever, whenever you guys want. So like I said, forming a hypothesis is really coming up with your problem statement. And so this, to me, is so important because it allows you to really narrow your search for the data. Like, Molly, when you run an entrepreneur, you teach an entrepreneur class, like there's so much data out there for new companies that you're coming up with. Like, where do you start? And at least in this, in data storytelling, it's really coming up with that problem that you're solving for your vendors or your customers or your students, whatever it is. It's coming up with that problem statement so you can really hone in on what will be helpful in solving that problem. And so the example that we're going to just run through the next few steps is students perform, and this is made up, better in one semester when compared to others. And so in this example, that might just come from your own brains. Like, I'm having a lot of really hard conversations in the spring with parents in parent-teacher conferences, as opposed to when I talk to them in the winter. Those conversations seem to be a lot less high-strung, or when I'm writing down my grades, it seems like I'm writing a lot more 50s in the summer or the spring than when I'm doing it in the winter. Just like a problem statement you are noticing and thinking, ooh, that seems off, or something could be done about that. So the next step is really collecting the data to apply to that problem statement. And like I said, when I was kind of like laying this all out, collecting data can come in so many different formats. But is also, I keep saying every step is important, is the most important. They're all important. But if you can't get your hands on the data, like this step is really hard, right? Like, okay, you have this problem statement, but what if I don't know how to get that data? So this can pose a lot of challenges. So I challenge you all to, if you take this presentation into action, is just push whoever that is that's in charge of that data. Is it your school board or your superintendent or whatever that is? Like, push for that data. It's yours, and there's ways to mask data to avoid confidentiality issues. And so this step is hard, but it can be done with some real grit and passion too. Of course, always helps. So in this example, we'll continue with this example, but collecting data, and for us, it's really using Excel. A lot of our data still lives in Excel. But for this example, students' grades, let's say you're pulling grades for 20 students to see how they're performing in one semester than the other. That could look very different for every single person on this call, right? Like, if you have grades in, I don't know, I used Blackboard in college. If you have your grades up in there, you just pull that maybe from that system. But it also might just be, you might still have a physical grade book, and that's where your data is coming from. So it's going to look different for everybody, but I think at the end of the day, it needs to end up in one place. And so that will kind of lead into that next step, but you can see, yeah.
What I was going to ask, like, for me in my classrooms, as far as what I teach,
yeah.
For me, the data collection could be a customer survey, like a one-on-one interview. It could be an email survey. It could be a Google survey. So, like, it could be a taste test. It could be maybe, a taste test and they like cover their eyes, or I don't know. I'm like hearing that the data can really be
anything.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. That makes
That's
sense.
exactly right, Molly. Yep, it can be literally anything. And like I said, if it's those taste tests or surveys, it might be manual. It might still be a manual process, and that's okay. Like it might be pulling the answers that you're getting emailed back one by every single vendor or every single person that's filling out that survey, and just writing that down in one place in Excel. Like that might be it.
Yep.
So yeah, it can take many different forms. It's, even for us, it still does. But I think putting it all together in one place,
Sure.
I mean, that's the first step. Yeah.
Kayla,
Yeah.
so when I'm dealing with a smaller group, like for example, my career seminar class, this sort of option works. But oftentimes I'm making decisions that will impact much larger groups of people. For example, when I need to know who in all of the high schools in St. Paul Public School are interested in the healthcare industry or interested in the, IT industry or whatnot, I need to both hear from and see data from, it might even be like 15,000 people. Or if it's just one particular school, it might be 500 or it might be 2,000. So do you have suggestions for when you need to gather from large numbers and not hand enter, because it makes it not possible for me to gather and use the data? So do you have suggestions for that?
Yeah, and we have something sort of similar. I mean, what I would suggest is there's different what's the word, like applications that you could use for that kind of thing if you're sending out surveys of that kind. I know there's millions we use at the firm, but I know one we use, and Josh, correct me if I'm wrong, is Qualtrics, and that's a survey tool that you basically create the survey in this website. You send the link out to those people, they fill the survey, and then when they submit it, that information gets uploaded to the Qualtrics site, and then all you do is pull basically an Excel document from that site, and it has all the survey data in a kind of a messy format, sort of like this on the slide, but you can kind of move it and get it into the right format. So that's one that we've used. Josh, I know you've probably used others.
Yeah, I would say if you're looking for survey type of information, Qualtrics is one. That's not free though. I know SurveyMonkey is another application you can use. Woofoo, which is WUFOO. Woofoo is another survey application, and then there's Google Surveys as well. So those are all different ways you can go about asking certain types of questions and getting feedback from a large group of folks. The other alternative that I use pretty regularly when we're doing anything to the effect of societal impact is the government tracks a lot of data, and it's all publicly free. And so, depending on what type of information you're looking for, sometimes it's just a Google search to find out which what government institution actually tracks that. But a few that I use typically, if you're looking at employment type of info, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, they track a lot. The census, there's always a lot of good demographics information in the census. And then what's the other one? I think the last one is the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, where they track a lot of information on demographics and job placement types of info. But typically, like I said, it just takes a Google search or two before you find the right government organization that tracks that. And for the most part, they release all of that for free online. So that's always a quick way to get a lot of info.
Yeah, and the Google surveys too, if you're doing a survey type, is actually really good because it links directly to an Excel. So the minute you send the survey out and people start answering, it collects that data into a Google sheet, which is basically just Excel. So you don't have to go in and export it like you would in a Qualtrics or something like that. Cool. I think we have some in the chat, maybe. Oh, wonderful. Okay, good. Miriam, that was your question, right? All right. Awesome. Sweet. Okay. Anything else on that front? All right. Awesome. So yeah, so for this example, and we're just going to continue through this example, but obviously bring up others as you have questions on them. So yeah, so you're pulling 20 grades of 20 students. It looks like this, kind of ugly, just like it might look from Qualtrics, like we've used before. And we pull it, and this is literally what it looks like. It's like, this is so hard to read. So the next step is really going to help you put that into a structured format. And that's the data wrangling step here. And what this does is sort of like make it look pretty. And this is my favorite part, but not probably Josh's favorite part. I came from obviously an accounting background, like I said, and this is exactly what we needed to do anything related to that job. Like we needed our data to be structured. We needed it to look nice. Had that type A personality. So this is that step. So it's pulling all the stuff you just saw in the previous tab, the previous slide in here, and putting it into this nice table for us. And so this is really going to be that step that allows you to read the data and understand it. And so if we just say, let's just continue with this example, and Miriam, even for your example of, if people are interested in that, in different industries, what do those answers actually mean? So in this example, winter grades, how was that grade calculated? Was it 8 homework assignments and 4 tests? Was it, out of 100? Was it, those types of things of understanding what this data is actually made up of. And in Miriam, in your example, what does the health industries include? What is included in each of those buckets that you're going to be looking into? And what type of people, what demographics, to Josh's point of all those different sources, what demographics are in those buckets? So that when you get asked those questions and you're looking at the data, you actually know what the data is behind it. So you could say it's 20 to 30-year-olds in Massachusetts, things like that, like really understanding that data. And then are you confident that the data is correct and accurate? And so if you pulled all these grades for these 20 students, are you sure those are final? Are they final grades? Are they midterm grades? Are we sure everything was recorded correctly? Did we do a quality check to make sure that all those grades were recorded right? Was there a miskey? Things like that. That's kind of what this step is really about. I think we have something in the chat, Josh. Did you? Oh, good. Okay, so yeah, so that's what our data wrangling step is. Again, something I enjoy doing. Josh does not. So does anything on that step? If not, I'll just continue through here. Awesome. So the next step is going to be the best step, which is analyzing the data. So this is really actually understanding what that table is telling us. What is this nice, pretty table actually saying? We know what the data is, we know what the grades are made up of. We know how a grade is calculated. We know the students, but what insights could we actually gather from all of that? And so you can see in this little box to the right here, we've done some like average functions, really is what it was in Excel. So you do equals average, and you just average each grade for the semester that you're looking at. And you can see the first 2 lines here are just averages for the winter and the spring semesters. So on average, how are your students performing? Well, if we look at that, it's really saying they're performing better in the winter than when they are in the spring. Okay, that's helpful. But if we go a step further, we can see that the average in the winter is only higher than in the spring if the students are also enrolled in specialized classes. And again, this is like a made up example. I understand that this is like kind of, maybe it's far out, but let's just say for whatever reason in the wintertime, some students are enrolled in specialized classes, whatever that is, that's extra classes, or it's, you know, they're being enrolled in something that connects them to their passion, or they're taking specialized classes for a standardized tests. And so maybe that means they're more engaged, or they're using their time more properly because they don't have as much free time. So they're, you know, they're focusing their time better in the winter. There could be 1,000 reasons. But we can see with a little bit more digging that it's not necessarily that they're performing better in the winter versus spring. It's that they're performing better in the winter when they have specialized classes. So it's like, okay, well, that's an interesting insight. How or if could we apply that year round so that my students are then set up for success? And so that's just a sort of insight you could gather from this table, really, through all this data. I think we have something in the chat. I could.
We ran up on time, so we'll try and breeze through some of the backup.
Okay, perfect. Awesome. So the next step here, I will try and go through this somewhat quickly, but is harnessing insight and putting a visualization together. So this is Josh's favorite. This is not mine. He's a wizard at putting these visualizations together, as you can see. And all these visualizations really do is pull out really important data points into an easy to read format. Like right here, you can tell, you couldn't quite tell this in the table, but that if they're enrolled in specialized classes in the winter, their grade is 48% higher made up. That's probably incredibly exaggerated. But you can see that. You can see that data point very easily here. And again, there's tools out there that can help put these visualizations together. PowerPoint has its own, there's Tableau is an application. Excel, you could literally just put it in Excel and make it visual as well. All right, so we'll kind of skip some of these fun quotes here. And then the next section is making that data informed decision. So you have all of this data, but what do you do with it? And in this example, it could be just putting together a presentation and bringing it to your school board, or your superintendent. Who's going to listen? Who's going to care that your students need more specialized classes to perform better? And that's where the value comes in. That's where you're really changing either your lives or your students' lives by taking that next step and proving to other people that you're confident in the data, you've seen it, and that you know the next steps. And so next step here is, how do you convey that message? It's likely in some sort of presentation like we're doing now. And Josh, I'll just run through these. I know we originally had these separated, but the first step here is what is the intended outcome? What do you want? In this example, it was giving my students more specialized classes. And well, let me take a step back. Before you do any presentation, we definitely want to make sure we know who our audience is. I think that's the most important first step. In this example, it'll be your school board. But that is going to be the crux to every decision you make into this presentation, because if I'm giving a presentation to Josh, I'm going to likely give him a lot more data than I would give my boss. My boss will have a much more high level presentation than Josh would, because Josh and I are data people. And so, yeah, so step one is what's the intended outcome? Keep it simple. You want your students to have more specialized classes. Step two, what type of communication is that going to be? In this, I mean, this could be a million things, but is it virtual? Is it in person? It's likely virtual these days. And what is the best way for your audience to understand what you're trying to put out there? Your storyline, that's this third step here. Again, considering your audience. Is it top down or bottom up. And top down is really saying your main message at the top and then having all those supporting evidences and all this data at the end. Or is it bottom up? Is it this is the data I collected, you're seeing the improved scores in the winter with specialized classes, and this is what I think we should do. And then putting your visuals in your presentation. So that bar graph was incredibly helpful, incredibly insightful, but where do you put that? And how do you balance that with the words and the data on your presentation? And that can be hard. But like I said, if you're doing it at a higher level, it might be more pictures. And then giving your presentation and receiving feedback. Josh and I do this all the time. Like if I'm doing any presentation for my boss, I send it to him first and he gives me feedback. I incorporate that feedback and I might change some of the things I'm going to say based on what he's been able to find. I think that's a really important step. It's so valuable, and getting somebody else's perspective is just, you can never go wrong. But making sure you're asking those right people. If you're going to do a presentation to the school board, me and Josh might not be your best audience to test that with, but your colleagues might. So we'll leave that up to you guys. Okay, awesome. And I know we're kind of going on here, but I'm sorry I wrote just such a long letter. I didn't have time to write a short one. Just a funny quote, like keeping these things as simple as you can and making it easy to understand is really going to help you get your point across. Cool. So that is more or less the end. We have a bunch of resource slides at the bottom at this presentation when we send out of just links for you all to explore. Some of them are PwC, like curricula, tech-based curricula that you can bring into your classroom. And some of them are just like this, the app that has like Google virtual field trips, like just like it's a wealth of knowledge. So we'll send these out. With all these links, there's one at the end here that has a bunch of resources kind of combined into one, but we'll send all that out. And I know we are like probably even far past time. So I just want to thank you all so much. I'm sorry I had to rush that at the end. I hope this was helpful. You guys were an amazing, amazing, amazing group of people to work with. I'm so happy we did this. And we hope to see you on the, maybe we'll cross paths another time. But thank you so much. Is there any last minute questions or anything you guys want to talk about before we end?
Oh, it was wonderful. Thank you. So there are schools or teachers using the digital fitness app to introduce these concepts to their students.
Oh yeah. Yeah. It's amazing. Okay. You just need to log in with your school email. We whitelisted all the most school domains. So as long as you use your school email, you should be totally fine.
Thanks for your time today. It was really wonderful.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming.
Thanks a lot. I do appreciate it.
Yes.
Thank you.
I learned some things.
Good. That was the whole point. I'm happy you guys learned things, and we'll send out, this stuff, and obviously be in touch if you have anything else.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, guys. Bye.
Bye.